In this video, we're going to see how the P/E ratio relates to the dividend discount model. But before that, let's review what we have learned about the P/E ratio so far. So, we can use the P/E ratio to come up with an estimate of the stock price for a firm. The way to do that is to find a PE ratio for a comparable firm and multiplying that by the earnings per share of the company that we want to calculate its stock price. The result of this multiplication would give us an estimate of the firm stock price. To see why that makes sense, uh, let's think about when you want to buy a building, either a house or an office building. So, when you want to buy an office building, the thing that you would do is to see what other office building has been recently sold in that area or neighborhood. So, for example, you want to buy an office building A, which is 1,500 square feet, and there was another building that was recently sold for 500 per square feet, and it was 200 and sorry 2,500 square feet in total. So this 500 is the price per square feet. So um, to value the building A, you would multiply this price per square feet by the size of that building. So if you multiply these two numbers, you can get an idea of how much that building should cost. And definitely, there are differences between office buildings. So you would consider some adjustment to the price that you calculate. So first of all, you get a rough idea about how much the building should worth, and then you would make some adjustments. For example, if that building is located in a preferably in a preferred location rather than the one that has been recently sold, or it has better views, or so forth. Okay, so we have the same situation for valuing the stock price. We can use the P ratio. Um, so we divide the price of a comparable firm by its earnings to normalize it. And once we do that, we can use that P ratio to come up with an estimate of the price for another firm that we want to evaluate. And to do that, we need to multiply it by the earnings of the firm that we want to multiply. And we also said that we have two choices for the earnings. We can use trailing earnings to calculate the trailing P ratio. These earnings ratios are the earnings over the 12 prior months. So uh, the earnings over prior 12 months is uh, trailing earnings. And the other option is to use the expected earnings. When we use the expected earnings, we call that P ratio forward P ratio. So the forward P ratio is P0 divided by earnings at time one, a year from now. Okay. And we said that for the valuation purposes, we prefer the forward P ratio because we are more concerned about the future earnings of the firm. Okay. So to see the relation between the constant dividend growth model And the P ratio, first, let me write what was the estimate of price of the company based on the constant dividend growth model or the Gordon model. So uh, in this model says the price of the company is equal to the dividends at time one divided by uh, the cost of equity capital for the firm minus the growth rate of dividends. Because we assume that the dividends growth at a constant rate G, we could come up with this formula to calculate the price of the firm at time zero. And also notice that as we already see, the forward P ratio is price at time zero divided by uh, EPS, earning per share, at the end of year one. Okay, so to see the relation between these two, what I can do is just divide both sides of this equation by EPS1. So if I do that, what I get is in the left hand side, I would have P0 divided by EPS1, which is forward PE ratio. Then on the other side, what would I have is dividend at the end of year one divided by EPS at the end of year one, uh, all over equity cost of capital minus the growth rate of dividends. And if you notice, the numerator equals to the dividend payout ratio. So again, all over RE minus G. So here you can see there is a relation between G and PE. So let me, okay, so here you can maybe see it more clearly. So first of all, there are relations between the forward PE and each of these parameters that we have here. So the higher payout ratio would translate to higher PE, or the lower equity cost of capital, keeping everything else equal, would translate to higher P forward P ratios. And what is interesting and important for us here is the relationship between G and the forward P ratio. So here there is a direct relation between the forward P ratio and the growth rate, meaning that if I keep the dividend payout ratio and the equity cost of equity constant, the higher the growth rate of dividends, the higher the forward P ratio. Okay, so if I'm comparing two firms which have similar dividend payout ratios and equity cost of capitals, if the growth rate for firm A is higher than the growth rate for firm B, then the PE ratio of firm A should be higher than P ratio of firm B. Okay? So let's see an example here. Office Depot and Staples are both specialty retailers. In 2013, Office Depot had a price of $69 and forward earnings per share of 1.36. Staple had a price of $15 and 96 cents, and forward earnings per share of $1.31. Calculate their forward P ratios and explain the differences. So to calculate the forward P ratio, the thing that we need to do is just to divide the price by the earnings, the expected earnings. Okay, so I have done that in this slide. So the P ratio for Office Depot is 50.74, and for Staples, it's 12.18. So there is a clear difference between these two numbers. If we assume that the equity cost of capital for these two firms are very similar and also their payout ratios are similar, then the difference between these forward ratios should come from the growth rate. Okay, so the Office Depot's uh, P ratio is higher because investors expect the earnings of Office Depot to grow more than that of Staples. Okay, so here we see that because the growth rate for Office Depot is expected to be higher than Staples, its P ratio is much higher than that of Staples. And we can do that comparison because these two companies are in a same industry. So probably they have very similar cash flows, and the risk of their businesses are also similar.